I knew something was wrong the moment I opened my propane bill and saw $9,317 staring back at me from the page. My name is Henry Huxley, and I had been living in the Sycamore Ridge community in Gilbert, Arizona for exactly 3 years. It was one of those newer developments where every house looked vaguely similar, with beige stucco walls and red tile roofs that the HOA insisted we maintain. The neighborhood was fine, mostly quiet, except for the occasional power trip from our HOA president, a woman named Barbara Whitmore, who treated the position like she was running a small dictatorship. I stood in my kitchen, still in my work clothes from my job as an electrical engineer at a solar company downtown, and read the bill 3 more times. My hands started shaking. I lived alone in a modest 3-bedroom house. I kept my thermostat at a reasonable 72 degrees. My propane usage had never exceeded $200 in a single month, even during the coldest parts of winter. $9,000 was impossible. I immediately called the propane company, Southwest Gas and Fuel. A customer service representative named Jennifer answered after the 3rd ring. "This has to be a mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "There is no way I used this much propane." "Let me pull up your account, Mr. Huxley," Jennifer said. I could hear her typing. "Okay, I see here that your usage for the past 3 months has been significantly higher than your historical average. In December, you used 47 therms, in January, 183 therms, and in February, 291 therms. "That's insane," I said. "I don't even understand how that's physically possible. What could I possibly be heating?" "Sir, according to our records, we have a single line running to your property at 847 Mesquite Drive, correct?" "Yes, that's right." "The meter shows continuous high usage during business hours, particularly between 8 in the morning and 6 at night. Do you work from home?" "No, I'm gone all day. The house is empty." There was a pause. "Mr. Huxley, I recommend you have a technician come out to inspect your system. There might be a leak, or someone might be accessing your gas line without authorization." Someone accessing my line. The words hung in the air like a threat. I scheduled an inspection for the next morning and barely slept that night. I kept running through possibilities in my head. A leak seemed unlikely because my house would smell like gas. Theft seemed bizarre because who steals propane? But the more I thought about it, the more something nagged at me. The usage was highest during business hours, when I was at work, when someone could be using my gas without me knowing. The next morning, a technician named Marcus arrived in a Southwest Gas and Fuel truck. He was a man in his 50s with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent decades working outdoors. "Show me your tank," he said after I explained the situation. We walked around to the side of my house where my 500-gallon propane tank sat behind a small wooden fence the HOA had required for aesthetic purposes. Marcus immediately knelt down and started following the copper line that ran from the tank. "Your main line goes into your house here," he said, pointing. "But look at this." He moved some decorative rocks that bordered my property line, and I saw it. A secondary line, maybe half an inch in diameter, branched off from my main propane line. It ran along the ground, barely covered by dirt and rocks, heading toward the back of my property. "That's not supposed to be there," I said. "No, it definitely is not," Marcus said. "Someone tapped your line." My heart started pounding. "Where does it go?" We followed the line. It ran along my back fence, through a gap in the wrought iron bars and into the common area behind my house. The common area was maintained by the HOA and included a large grassy park, some playgrounds, and at the far end, the clubhouse. The clubhouse was a single-story building with large windows and a covered patio. The HOA used it for meetings, community events, and it was available for residents to rent for private parties. I had been inside maybe twice in 3 years. The copper line ran directly to the back of the clubhouse and connected to their heating system. "Well," Marcus said, standing up and brushing dirt off his knees, "I found your problem. Someone connected your propane to the clubhouse. That's theft of utilities, and it's illegal." "The HOA did this," I said. The realization hit me like cold water. "They tapped my line to heat their building." "You need to call the police," Marcus said. "And you need to call a lawyer. I'll document everything and provide a report to Southwest Gas and Fuel. This is going to be a whole situation." I felt rage building in my chest. Barbara Whitmore and her board had been stealing from me for months, running up a $9,000 bill, and probably had no intention of ever telling me. I took photos of everything: the tap in my line, the copper pipe running across the property, the connection at the clubhouse. Marcus wrote up his report and gave me a copy. Then I called the Gilbert Police Department. Officer Sarah Mitchell arrived within an hour. She was a younger officer, maybe in her late 20s, with her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. I showed her everything, and she took her own photos and notes. "This is definitely theft," she said. "Utilities theft is a serious crime in Arizona. Who has access to your property?" "The HOA has access to the common areas, and technically they have the right to enter homeowner property for maintenance issues. But I never authorized anything like this." "Do you know when this was installed?" I thought about my bills. My usage started going up in December, so probably late November or early December. "I'm going to need to speak with your HOA board," Officer Mitchell said. "Do you have contact information?" I gave her Barbara Whitmore's phone number and email. I also gave her the contact information for the other board members I knew about: Donald Chen, the treasurer, and Patricia Romano, the secretary. After Officer Mitchell left, I sat in my house and tried to process everything. The HOA had literally stolen from me. They had tapped my propane line without permission, without asking, without even telling me, and now I was on the hook for $9,000 in charges that should have been theirs. I called Southwest Gas and Fuel back and asked to speak with a supervisor. After explaining the situation again and confirming that Marcus had filed his report, they agreed to flag my account and halt any collections activity until the situation was resolved. But they made it clear: someone had to pay for the propane that was used, and until it was determined otherwise, I was responsible for the charges on my account. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. His name was Richard Voss, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Phoenix, and he agreed to meet with me the next day. Richard Voss was a man in his early 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor. His office was clean and professional, with law books lining the walls and certificates from Arizona State University prominently displayed. "This is one of the more brazen cases I've seen," Richard said after I explained everything and showed him the photos and Marcus's report. "The HOA tapped your utility line without authorization and used it for their own purposes. That's theft of utilities under Arizona Revised Statute Section 13-1811. It's a Class 1 misdemeanor if the value is less than $1,000. But given that we're talking about over $9,000, this could potentially be elevated to a felony charge." "So what do I do?" I asked. "We sue them," Richard said simply. "We file a civil lawsuit against the HOA for the full amount of the charges, plus damages, plus legal fees, and depending on what the police investigation finds, there may be criminal charges as well." "How long will this take?" "Civil cases can take months or even years, depending on how cooperative the other side is. But given that we have clear evidence of theft and the police are involved, I suspect the HOA will try to settle quickly to avoid criminal prosecution of their board members." I hired Richard on the spot. He drew up a demand letter to be sent to the HOA board, outlining the theft, the charges I had incurred, and demanding immediate payment plus additional damages for emotional distress and legal fees. We calculated everything out: $9,317 for the propane, $5,000 for emotional distress, and Richard's fees, which would be billed hourly. The demand letter went out the next day via certified mail. I did not have to wait long for a response. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered, and a woman's shrill voice immediately started yelling at me. "Mr. Huxley, this is Barbara Whitmore, president of the Sycamore Ridge HOA. What do you think you are doing sending us this ridiculous letter? Barbara, your HOA tapped my propane line and stole $9,000 worth of gas. I'm not doing anything except trying to get reimbursed for what you stole. We did no such thing. This is slander. We will sue you for defamation." "I have photos, Barbara. I have a report from the propane company. The police are investigating. You can sue me all you want, but the evidence is clear." The clubhouse needed heat. The board determined that the most cost-effective solution was to temporarily connect to a nearby residential line until we could get our own system repaired. I could not believe what I was hearing. She was actually admitting to it. Barbara, you stole from me. You didn't ask permission. You didn't tell me. You just tapped my line and left me with a $9,000 bill. The HOA has expenses. Every homeowner is supposed to contribute to the community through HOA dues, not through stealing my utilities. I'm going to recommend the board file a grievance against you for being uncooperative and hostile to the HOA. We can fine you, you know. You're going to fine me after you stole from me? Try it. I'll add it to the lawsuit. Barbara hung up on me. I immediately called Richard and told him about the conversation. She admitted to it over the phone? Richard sounded almost gleeful. That's perfect. If she's willing to say that on a recorded line or in any written communication, this case just got a lot easier. What do we do now? We wait for their official response to the demand letter. They have 15 days to respond. If they don't pay or offer a reasonable settlement, we file the lawsuit. Officer Mitchell called me the next day with an update on the police investigation. I spoke with Barbara Whitmore and the other board members, she said. Mrs. Whitmore confirmed that the HOA made the connection to your propane line. She claims they had authorization based on the HOA bylaws that allow them access to homeowner property for maintenance purposes. Maintenance purposes? They stole my gas to heat their clubhouse. I know, Mr. Huxley. I'm just telling you what she said. However, I consulted with the county prosecutor's office, and they agree that this constitutes theft of utilities. The bylaws allowing property access for maintenance do not grant permission to steal utilities. We're preparing criminal charges against the HOA and potentially against Mrs. Whitmore personally for authorizing the theft. What kind of timeline are we looking at? The prosecutor will likely file charges within the next week or two. Given the amount involved, it will probably be charged as felony theft. I'll keep you updated. I felt a grim satisfaction. The HOA had messed with the wrong person. The 15-day deadline for the demand letter came and went with no response from the HOA. Richard filed the civil lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court. The complaint outlined everything: the unauthorized tap, the theft of propane, the $9,000 bill, emotional distress, and a request for punitive damages given the willful and intentional nature of the theft. We sued the HOA for $25,000 total. 2 days after the lawsuit was filed, I got another call. This time, it was Donald Chen, the HOA treasurer. Mr. Huxley, this is Donald Chen. I'm calling about the lawsuit. What about it? I want you to know that some of us on the board were not aware of what Barbara did. She authorized the tap on your propane line without consulting the rest of the board. When I found out, I immediately objected, but by then the damage was done. Why are you telling me this? Because I think we need to settle this quickly. The HOA has insurance, and I've already contacted our insurance company. They're willing to pay your propane bill plus reasonable damages. Can we work something out without going to trial? You need to talk to my lawyer, I said. Richard Voss. I'm not settling for anything less than full compensation. I understand. I'll have our attorney reach out to him. Donald sounded genuinely apologetic, and I believed him when he said he hadn't known about Barbara's plan. But that did not change what had happened, or the fact that I was owed money. A week later, Richard called me with news. The HOA's insurance company reached out. They're offering to pay the full $9,000 for the propane, plus your legal fees to date, which are about $4,000, but they're not willing to pay emotional distress or punitive damages. So $13,000 total? Yes. What do you think I should do? It's up to you, Richard said. If we go to trial, we might get more, but trials are expensive and time-consuming. We have a strong case, but there's always risk. The insurance company is basically offering to make you whole for your actual damages and legal costs. I thought about it. $13,000 would cover everything I had paid so far and compensate me for the hassle. It would not punish the HOA the way I wanted, but the criminal charges were still pending, and that might provide the accountability I was looking for. Let me think about it, I said. That evening, I got a knock on my door. When I opened it, Barbara Whitmore was standing on my porch. She was a woman in her mid-50s with short blonde hair and a permanent expression of disapproval. She was wearing a pantsuit that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "We need to talk," she said. I don't think that's a good idea, Barbara. You should talk to your lawyer. I'm not here as the HOA president. I'm here as your neighbor. Against my better judgment, I let her in. We sat in my living room, and she folded her hands in her lap like she was about to deliver a rehearsed speech. Henry, I want to apologize. What I did was wrong. I was under a lot of pressure to keep HOA costs down, and the clubhouse heating system broke in November. The quotes we got to repair it were astronomical, and I thought if we just temporarily used a nearby line, we could buy ourselves some time to save up for the repairs. So you chose my line? Your house was the closest to the clubhouse. It seemed like the logical choice. Did it occur to you to ask me? Or to tell me? Barbara looked down. I thought if I asked, you might say no. And I thought we could just pay the extra costs from the HOA reserves. But then the usage was higher than I expected, and the reserves weren't enough, and everything spiraled out of control. So you were planning to pay me back? Eventually, yes, once we figured out the budget. Barbara, that's not how this works. You can't just steal from someone and then pay them back later when it's convenient. That's still theft. I know that now. The board voted me out last night. Donald is the new president. I'm resigning from the HOA entirely. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated that she was facing consequences, but another part of me just felt tired. The police are pressing charges, I said. You know that, right? Yes. My lawyer says I'll probably be charged with felony theft. I might go to jail. Her voice cracked. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm going to pay for it. But I wanted to apologize to you in person. You didn't deserve this. No, I didn't. Barbara stood up. I hope you'll accept the settlement offer from the insurance company. The HOA doesn't have the money to pay more than that, and if you push for punitive damages, it will just bankrupt the community and hurt all the other homeowners who had nothing to do with this. After she left, I sat alone in my living room for a long time. I understood her point. If I pushed for maximum damages and bankrupted the HOA, it would hurt everyone in Sycamore Ridge, including people who were completely innocent. But I also felt like Barbara and the board needed to face real consequences for what they had done. The next day, I called Richard and told him to accept the settlement offer. $13,000 to cover my propane bill and legal fees. The HOA's insurance company would pay it within 30 days. Are you sure? Richard asked. Yeah, I'm sure. It's enough. Okay, I'll draw up the settlement agreement. Once it's signed, the civil case will be closed. What about the criminal case? That's separate. The county prosecutor will proceed regardless of what happens with the civil case. 3 weeks later, I received a check for $13,000 from the HOA's insurance company. I immediately paid off my propane bill and deposited the remaining $4,000 into my savings account. Marcus from Southwest Gas and Fuel came back out to my property and physically disconnected the unauthorized tap, sealing off my line so it could not be accessed again. The clubhouse got its heating system properly repaired, paid for by a special assessment levied against every homeowner in Sycamore Ridge. I paid my share, $150, without complaint. In April, the county prosecutor filed formal charges against Barbara Whitmore. 1 count of felony theft under Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 13-1802, for knowingly controlling property of another with the intent to deprive. The value of the theft exceeded $6,000, making it a Class 4 felony punishable by up to 3.75 years in prison. Barbara hired a criminal defense attorney, a man named Gary Stevenson, who had a reputation for getting favorable plea deals. I was contacted by the prosecutor's office and asked if I would be willing to testify if the case went to trial. I said yes, but it never went to trial. In May, Barbara accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony theft. In exchange, the prosecutor recommended a sentence of probation instead of prison time, provided she paid full restitution and performed community service. I attended the sentencing hearing. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix was busy that morning, with multiple cases being heard. Barbara sat at the defense table with her lawyer, looking smaller and older than I remembered. Her husband sat in the gallery, looking miserable. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge Patricia Moreno, reviewed the case file and the plea agreement. Ms. Whitmore, you held a position of trust as president of your homeowners association. You were responsible for managing community funds and making decisions that affected your neighbors. Instead, you chose to steal from one of those neighbors to solve a budget problem. That is a profound betrayal of trust. I understand, Your Honor, Barbara said quietly. The victim in this case, Mr. Huxley, incurred significant financial harm because of your actions. He was billed for propane he did not use, and he had to hire an attorney to fight for reimbursement. The emotional and financial stress you caused him is not insignificant. Judge Moreno paused and looked at the plea agreement. However, I also note that you have no prior criminal record, that you cooperated with the investigation, and that you have expressed genuine remorse. The victim has been made whole through the civil settlement. Taking all of this into account, I am inclined to accept the plea agreement. Barbara was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $9,317 to me directly. The restitution was in addition to what the insurance company had already paid, which meant I would actually come out ahead financially, though that had never been my goal. As we left the courthouse, Barbara approached me in the hallway. "Thank you for not pushing for prison time," she said. "I didn't push for anything. The prosecutor made that decision. Still, I know you could have made things harder for me. I appreciate that you didn't." I nodded. I did not have anything else to say to her. Over the next few months, Barbara paid the restitution in installments. $500 a month automatically deposited into my bank account. It took nearly 2 years for her to pay it off completely, but she never missed a payment. Life in Sycamore Ridge slowly returned to normal. Donald Chen turned out to be a much better HOA president than Barbara had been. He was transparent about the budget, held regular community meetings, and made sure that every major decision was voted on by the board and communicated to homeowners. The clubhouse was used more frequently for community events, and there was a general sense that the neighborhood was healing from the damage Barbara had caused. I stayed in my house and kept to myself mostly, though I did attend a few HOA meetings just to stay informed. At one meeting, about 6 months after the sentencing, a new homeowner raised her hand and asked about the special assessment we had all paid for the clubhouse repairs. "I heard there was some kind of scandal with the previous president," she said. "What exactly happened?" Donald hesitated, then gave a brief diplomatic summary. "The previous president made some poor decisions regarding community finances and utility usage. The issue was resolved through legal channels, and we've implemented new oversight procedures to ensure it doesn't happen again." The new homeowner seemed satisfied with that answer, and the meeting moved on. I thought about standing up and telling the whole story, about how Barbara had tapped my propane line and stolen thousands of dollars, about how I had to fight to get reimbursed, about the criminal charges and the plea deal. But I decided against it. The story was over. Barbara was gone. The community had moved on. After the meeting, Donald approached me. "Hey, Henry, I just wanted to thank you again for how you handled everything. A lot of people would have tried to destroy the whole HOA over what Barbara did. You could have bankrupted us." "I thought about it," I admitted, "but it would have hurt people who didn't do anything wrong. Still, I appreciate it, and I want you to know that the board has implemented new policies. No one can authorize any kind of work on homeowner property without written consent from the homeowner. No exceptions. What Barbara did will never happen again." "Good. Also, we're looking for new board members. Elections are coming up in a few months. Have you ever thought about joining?" I laughed. "No, definitely not. I like my life drama-free." Donald grinned. "Fair enough." As I drove home that night, I thought about everything that had happened. The shock of opening that $9,000 bill, the investigation, the lawsuit, the criminal charges. It had consumed months of my life and caused incredible stress. But in the end, justice had been served. I had been compensated for my losses. Barbara had faced consequences. The HOA had reformed. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car for a moment, looking at my house. It was just a house in a planned community in Gilbert, Arizona. Nothing special, but it was mine, and I had fought to protect it. My propane bill the next month was $147. Normal. Expected. Mine. I paid it without complaint. The restitution payments continued to arrive every month like clockwork. $500, direct deposit from Barbara Whitmore. I put the money into a savings account and tried not to think about it too much. By the end of the first year, I had received $6,000. By the end of the second year, the full $9,317 had been paid. I received a final letter from Barbara's probation officer confirming that the restitution had been paid in full and that Barbara was in compliance with all terms of her probation. I filed the letter away with all the other documents from the case: the original $9,000 propane bill, Marcus's inspection report, the police report, the lawsuit, the settlement agreement, the plea deal, and the restitution order. Sometimes I would see Barbara around town. Gilbert was not a huge city, and we occasionally ended up at the same grocery store or restaurant. We never spoke. She would see me, look away quickly, and move in the opposite direction. I did not blame her. I would not want to face me either if I were in her shoes. Her probation ended after 3 years. I knew because I had requested updates from the county prosecutor's office. She completed all her community service hours, paid all her restitution, and had no violations. The felony conviction would stay on her record forever, but she had served her sentence. Life continued. I got a promotion at work, which came with a significant raise. I started dating someone, a woman named Emily Norton, who worked as a teacher at a local elementary school. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Gilbert, and after a few months of dating, I told her the whole story about the HOA and the propane theft. "That is insane," Emily said. "I cannot believe someone would do that." "People do crazy things when they are under pressure," I said. "Barbara thought she was solving a problem, but she just created a bigger one. Do you ever regret how you handled it? Like, do you wish you had pushed for more punishment or more money?" I thought about it. "No, I got what I needed. Justice was served. I don't need revenge on top of that." Emily smiled. "You're a better person than I would have been." We got engaged a year later. Emily moved into my house in Sycamore Ridge, and we started planning a wedding. The neighborhood had become genuinely pleasant under Donald's leadership. The clubhouse hosted monthly community barbecues, and people actually showed up and socialized. The playground equipment was updated. The landscaping in the common areas was better maintained. It felt like a real community instead of just a collection of houses governed by an overbearing HOA. We decided to have our wedding reception at the clubhouse. It seemed fitting in a weird way. The place that had caused me so much trouble had been transformed into something positive. On the day of the wedding, as Emily and I danced during our first dance as a married couple, I looked around at all our friends and family gathered in the clubhouse. The heaters were running because it was a cool evening in March, but they were running on the clubhouse's own propane system, properly installed and properly paid for. Donald came up to me later in the evening with a glass of champagne. "Congratulations, man. Emily is great." "Thanks, Donald." "It's kind of surreal, right? Having your reception here after everything that happened?" "Yeah, but it feels like closing a chapter. The clubhouse isn't a crime scene anymore. It's just a community space." "That is a healthy way to look at it." We clinked glasses and drank. The following year, Emily and I found out she was pregnant. We started talking about converting one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery. The neighborhood was good for kids with the playground and the park and the other families around. It felt like the right place to raise a child. One afternoon, I was mowing my lawn when an older couple walked by. They were new to the neighborhood, had just moved in a few houses down. "Beautiful day," the man said. "Sure is," I replied. "We love this neighborhood. Everyone is so friendly and the HOA seems really well run." I smiled. "Yeah, it is now." The couple moved on, and I went back to mowing. I thought about how close Sycamore Ridge had come to being torn apart by Barbara's theft and the subsequent legal battle. If I had pushed harder, demanded more money, tried to bankrupt the HOA out of anger, the whole community would have suffered. Property values would have dropped. People would have been forced to pay massive special assessments. The neighborhood would have been known as that place with the corrupt HOA. Instead, we had recovered. The scandal was largely forgotten except by those who had lived through it. New families were moving in. Kids were playing in the park. The clubhouse was hosting events. Life was good. Our daughter Hannah was born in September. Emily took maternity leave from her teaching job, and I adjusted my work schedule to be home more. The neighborhood rallied around us, as neighbors do. People brought meals. The couple down the street, the Johnsons, offered to babysit any time we needed. Donald and his wife brought over a baby gift basket. It was during one of those early sleepless nights when I was holding Hannah at 3 in the morning while Emily got some rest that I really processed how much had changed. 2 years ago, I was locked in a legal battle with my HOA, fighting for justice and compensation. Now I was holding my daughter in the same house, in the same neighborhood, and everything was peaceful. The criminal justice system had worked. The civil system had worked. Barbara had been held accountable. I had been compensated. The HOA had reformed. Everyone had moved on. As Hannah grew, the neighborhood became even more important to us. Emily went back to teaching part-time, and we relied on the community support system. Hannah's first steps were in the park behind our house, the same park where the Clubhouse stood. Her first birthday party was in our backyard, with neighbors and friends gathered around. I ran into Barbara one more time, about 3 years after the sentencing. It was at a Target in Gilbert. We were both in the cleaning supplies aisle, and we nearly bumped into each other. "Henry," she said, looking startled. "Barbara." There was an awkward silence. Then Barbara spoke. "I heard you have a daughter now. Congratulations." "Thank you. I moved out of Sycamore Ridge. My husband and I bought a condo in Chandler. Smaller place, less maintenance. Better for us at this stage of life." "That sounds nice. I want you to know that I still think about what I did. I go to therapy for it. The guilt, the shame. I made a terrible decision, and it hurt you, and I'm sorry." I looked at this woman who had caused me so much trouble. She looked older now, more tired. The experience had aged her. "I accepted your apology years ago, Barbara. We're good." "Really?" "Really. You made a mistake. You faced consequences. You paid your debt. It's over." Barbara's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for saying that. You have no idea how much I needed to hear it. We parted ways, and I never saw her again." Years passed. Hannah grew into a bright, energetic little girl. We had a second child, a son named Henry Jr., who we called H.J. The house in Sycamore Ridge that had once been the site of a utility theft and a major legal battle became simply our family home, filled with toys and laughter and the chaos of raising 2 kids. Donald served as HOA president for 6 years before stepping down and passing the role to Patricia Romano, who did an equally good job. The neighborhood continued to thrive. Property values increased. The clubhouse underwent a renovation paid for by properly budgeted HOA dues and became an even nicer facility. I sometimes told the story of the propane theft to friends over beers as a cautionary tale about HOAs and the importance of oversight. It became a funny story in retrospect, though it had not been funny at the time. "So wait," my friend Greg said one evening. "The HOA just tapped your propane line without asking?" "Yep, and left me with a $9,000 bill." "That is insane. What did you do?" "I sued them for every Therm and won." "Good for you, man. Some people would have just paid it and moved on." I thought about it, but it was the principle of the thing. You can't just steal from people and expect no consequences. Emily, who had heard the story a dozen times by now, added, "And then the HOA president got charged with a felony." "She pleaded guilty," I clarified, "got probation and had to pay me back every penny." Greg shook his head. "That is wild. I guess it just goes to show that even HOAs have to follow the law." "Especially HOAs," I said. As I approached my 10th year living in Sycamore Ridge, I reflected on everything that had happened. The theft, the investigation, the lawsuit, the criminal case, the settlement, the restitution, the recovery. It had been a journey, one I would not wish on anyone, but one that had ultimately ended well. My propane bills remained normal, $150 in winter, maybe $70 in summer. The tank sat behind its decorative fence, with a properly sealed line running only to my house. No unauthorized taps, no theft, just my propane for my home, paid for by me. The clubhouse continued to host events. I walked past it almost daily, taking Hannah and HJ to the playground. Sometimes I would glance at the back of the building where the unauthorized line had once connected to my tank. There was no evidence of it now. Everything had been repaired and properly installed. Justice had been served. The system had worked, and life had moved on. That, I suppose, was the real ending to the story. Not the dramatic courtroom scene or the settlement check or even Barbara's guilty plea. The real ending was the normal, boring, everyday life that came after. The life where I paid my bills without shock, where my HOA functioned properly, where my family grew and thrived in our community. The story of the HOA that tapped my propane line became just another story, another memory, another example of a problem that was identified, addressed, and resolved. And that was exactly how it should have been. I stood in my backyard one evening, watching Hannah and HJ play on their swing set while Emily prepared dinner inside. The sun was setting over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The clubhouse was visible in the distance, its lights beginning to come on as it prepared for an evening event. Everything was exactly as it should be. My home, my family, my community, my propane. And that $9,000 bill that had started everything? It was filed away in a box in my garage, along with all the other documents from the case. A reminder of a problem solved, a battle won, and a life that continued. I went inside to join my family for dinner, closing the door on the past and embracing the present. The HOA that had once been my adversary was now just my HOA again, functioning properly, serving the community, and most importantly, paying for their own heating. That was all I had ever wanted: justice, accountability, and a fair resolution. And in the end, that was exactly what I got.